Hi guys, welcome to the January Tech Roundup. I'm Yemi, and with me are Dami and Tage. As always, we
Hola.
start the episode by apologizing for the long hiatus, very long hiatus.
It's
We
only Emi's fault.
promised,
It was Yemi's fault. I was going to say, I said, let me just respect myself. It's too early. But it was Yemi's fault.
yeah, I apologize on behalf of the build by Visible. We will try to do better, we promise. But yeah, so in today's episode, would be doing two things. One is just doing general highlights from last year. So talking about what happened in the ecosystem. I think all the reports that highlight from the investment side are out. We know what happened last year. We're just trying to share some of our thoughts on why what happened and then some predictions for this year. And let's get started. So I think most of the reports, like I mentioned, came out already, and some of the highlights from them were first that last year there was a lot of reduction in the investment activities compared to
hmm
the year before. Key highlights being, I think, there were about 2.5 billion in equity investments, which is 54% lower than the year before, which was lower than the year before. And this feels like doom and gloom, but we promise it's not doom and gloom. So I'm just gonna talk a
Who is
bit about.
promising?
Yemi promises it's not doom and gloom. I think it's just really aligned with like some of the global trends that we saw
Agree.
already, and I think it's weird to say, but I think it's actually a good thing that we see this year because it shows that first our ecosystem isn't a bubble, like it's still tied to what's happening globally. One of the key things about just Africa generally is that a huge chunk of the investment in startups still comes from global investors. And then they are realigning their portfolios. Okay, I'm sounding like super serious, like a report, but clearly
I mean,
because they are realigning their
that's
portfolios,
absolutely the foundation,
it's
right?
affecting like their investments in Africa also. And then just key highlights is, let's see, across all the markets, like the most dominant markets, there was like a slowdown in investment. Nigeria finally was not number one investment destination. South
I know,
Africa
right?
overtook by total volume of equity, but Nigeria still had
Depends
the
on who you
most
ask, though.
It
deals.
depends on that's what I was gonna say that it depends on what you ask.
Depends on
Because
who you
like
ask. Because,
there's like
like,
three different
pa-
sources and there's one with
Kenya,
Kenya and there's
there's
one
one
with
with
South Africa or something as the top. So it really depends on who you ask.
I think for me, yeah, historically, I trust Partek's report the best. And then, so they break down into equity and debt. And so it gives you like a good visibility as to what's happening on both sides. And it's interesting just to like see how one more important debt has become in the last couple of years. Debt slowed down also this year, but not as much as the year before. But then I trust Partek's report. My friends at Partek
for
have
the
never
sake of,
disappointed me with their report. So I definitely trust what's in Partek's report. And
So they can sponsor this podcast too. That's all.
Bruh.
if you say so.
Actually, I trust three of them's podcasts. The Big Deal, Brighter, and Partic. So three of them can sponsor
It just sounds very political. It's like I'm for everybody and I'm
I
for
stand.
nobody. I
Yeah,
trust
I stand.
everybody's report.
You go where the money go.
Yeah, but I
Yep.
think honestly, like it's hard to collect like data, and everyone does it very differently. I think Brita tries to track from the deal's perspective. So like when there are deal announcements, they try to reflect everything across all the markets. In my experience, Partech tries to track from the fund perspective in addition to the deals perspective. So what they do is they have information on all the deals, but then they send emails to like all the fund managers that they know, like the most active fund managers across the continent, and they're basically saying also, what did you do? What have you reported yet? What haven't you reported? And what are you fine with us including in our reports? Which I think, yeah. So there's a lot of trust there, which is a competitive advantage for them. I
Do
spoke
you
to
get?
one
I
of
was
my
about to say that,
friends
like, how
a
they're able
couple
to
of weeks ago, and then she's like, "Yeah, me, Partech has all of this. They come and they ask us for it. Like, why can't they give us access?" And I'm like, "Because when you give them your data, you tell them you trust them and you don't want them to give anyone else." And that's like basically what everyone else does. And I think there's definitely room for like other players to do this. But I think for Partech, it's definitely a competitive advantage at this point, just because they have probably the most, I would even say the most complete or the most up to date, because a lot of these deals are fairly public already. And the ones that are not public, there's a good chance that before their next funding round, they would be public. But I think it just gives them a view on transactions slightly before everyone gets like the lagged view. So most times what Tage would let us know is slightly lagged. So like someone raised funds like 4 months ago and then announced. Yeah. So I think the one advantage there
I
is they
think Brighter
probably,
too, like the other guys do the same thing.
yeah, they do, but I think because Partech is an investor, like they
Investor,
understand
yeah.
investor speak slightly more. I think everyone understands investor speak, by the way. But like, yeah, that was one of the highlights, just in terms of like markets and South Africa coming up. Participating investors dropped. I think I highlighted this earlier by like 50%. My theory on this is like there's two fronts. First is a lot of global investors paused as they reassess their portfolios globally. We see players like Tiger,
Yeah,
one of the
case in point, I
more,
think they had like 8 investments in 2022,
yeah, one of the
and
most active investors. Yeah,
last year they had, I don't think they had any.
I think it was one,
Uh,
and I think it was a lagged
yeah.
report.
A live report, I don't think there was any announced. So do you mean like, okay, it's yet to be announced?
No, no, I
Or
think
do
it
you
was
mean it
one
was
that
announced
you
late?
announced, yeah, in 2023. But I think it
Three.
was a lagged report. Yeah,
Of Tiger.
yeah.
That's interesting. I actually cannot remember like any
Forgotten your
Tiger.
deals stage, man.
Bruh, like I can't keep track. But check for real. Is there anything like that?
Uh, maybe um, maybe I'm mistaken anyway. But I'm pretty sure I saw something at some point last year from, I
I
think
know
very
they
early
delayed
last
the
year.
deal last year, but I'm not sure if I reported on it or if it was announced. But yeah,
Yeah,
like you were saying, the participating investors, especially the global ones,
yeah. I think that's.
retreated like, you know, like flies. And I think you also you mentioned earlier about those investors reassessing their portfolio and trying to like shore up wherever they are in the US and more maybe Western markets than looking
I don't
elsewhere
even think it's just the
across the
Western
emerging.
markets. I think they just slowed down generally, and it, an indicator
Yeah,
of
but
that.
like some of them still like move funds from maybe crypto to AI and climate and
Yeah,
still
so I
like
think
maintain investments.
AI and climate have definitely been very hot. Like even in Africa, I think for emerging managers, the people that I think had, I wouldn't say like the easiest run, but I know like two climate funds that were able to raise. Well, it feels like most of
Hmm.
the emerging managers are struggling with fundraising. But I'd say AI and climate are very sexy now. I don't know how long they'll be sexy for, but yeah, those are definitely some of like the
Yeah.
sexiest scenes last year. So a bunch of managers still chose to double down there. I think maybe they use it as like a de-risking or like just a bet that they expected to pay up eventually. Yes.
And talking about like debt, is foreign investors retreating and more debt being raised. I think okay, the debts, venture debts reduced from last year, right?
Yeah, it did. It
Last
reduced
year
a
compared to
bit.
2022, a bit.
Yes.
Yeah, so I think maybe my point is like who are the startups raising this venture debt from? And also we saw increased participation from DFIs, right, in rounds, leading equity and debt rounds. So is that like a positive thing for the ecosystem that we have, like the likes of IFC, BII, Propaco coming into rounds and participating instead of doing it via venture funds, which has been like what they've done over the past couple of years. But like last year, they're more like prominent in these rounds themselves.
I personally don't think like there's been a shift in how the DFIs have participated. I think historically funds like IFC, for example, they've been fairly active as a growth stage investor. So they would probably invest through funds and then understand what's happening in companies and then choose to back who they view as winners after a while with
Mm-hmm.
bigger checks. I think the key part here is probably access to debt, which is very important. That's one of the things I'm excited about, like through the DFIs, which I think is increasing or has increased in the last year. But I think definitely like they've always played. I think they're starting to come down market a bit and starting to do earlier deals themselves directly. I'm still out to see like what the for the jury on that because I'm not entirely sure how well that works. But I think we just wait and see how those deals work, particularly for their earlier stage investments. But I think on the growth side, they've always been fairly active.
Does that say something about our growth stage investing in Africa? Because I know like the reports across like the three reports, growth stage investing went down, right, by a couple of
Yeah, I think growth
percentages,
went down
and
31%, which is like the highest in terms of like the
31,
average size. Yeah, the average size of growth investments,
which
like
is
it went
funny
down.
because we had like three, four, growth stage funds close rounds and close their growth stage firms close their funds last year, right? So is it that there are no there are few rather growth stage startups to back, or there's not enough capital to back them?
So I'll probably start with my definition of like a pure growth stage investor. We don't have a lot of pure growth stage investors. So they're investors who are early to growth stage and can do
That's
growth
A.
stage deals. So they can do a seed, a series A, a B, a C, but when they look and construct their portfolios, a big portion of their portfolio is probably going to be Series A businesses rather than Series C's or D's. So those are like the I would say the TLComs and the Partex, where they have big funds, but when they build their portfolio, most times the strategy is come in fairly earlier and then participate and increase your stake in the companies as they grow across these other stages. And maybe from your portfolio, you do maybe one or two pure growth stage deals, which are like post Series B
C and D.
when you
Yeah,
come in here. But
but I'll reckon that like late stage, don't you
yeah,
think?
so that
I
is
mean, like
growth.
there are different funds from that, like different. So maybe what applies in the US doesn't really apply here, but like when you see funds raise maybe $900 million or $1 billion, they're saying okay, they're investing in late stage investing, so startups rather, so from C, D, E, whatever, like to IPO. And the growth stage guys are like the A and B, and sometimes C, right? But in Africa, it's like when these growth stage funds like announce it's okay, we want to do ABC, or we can do maybe post C, right? So I don't think we have late stage funds, to be honest.
I
Do you
think
And
even
two,
have like?
people.
Do we have enough late stage startups to?
exactly, yeah, there's that too. We don't really have that. Maybe the unicorns. Because I know Florida, for instance, the Series D, which is a late stage startup, in my opinion. Then you have Time Bank is Series. I think they're about to do Series C. Um, and Copa is a Series C or Series D startup, right? So we have actually just a few late stage startups, but then it's like what's it called? Semantics, I guess. It could mean the same thing, or maybe there's a big difference because I don't think the funds that they've raised like 150, 200 are enough for the kind of Series D investments that maybe the likes of Florida Wave or maybe Copa that have raised a couple of millions or hundreds of millions would need before IPO, right? So I think like you're right in the sense that they're targeted like A to C should be their sweet spot, but I don't think they should be doing seed deals, which I know a couple of them have. For example, TLCom with um, I think Okra back then, and Partech did with Revio too, right? And it's like opportunistic seed deals is what they call it. I'm like, you raise this bunch of money for growth stage A, B, C. So why are you going to C to seed? Is it because we don't have enough companies like backable companies at those growth stage company levels?
So it's not that they can't invest in earlier deals. So from a portfolio construction perspective, so what happens most times is you have X amount of money, and you're going to spread it across different stages. If you see exciting early deals that you're very excited about, you can place bets in those. And then what that means is it's going to be slightly cheaper for you to invest in those earlier. And then if they do really,
Mm-hmm.
really well, they help your portfolio. Most times, it will probably average out deals in a certain round. So if you had a portfolio of 10 companies, there's a good chance that maybe five or six of them would be at the sweet spot for your fund, which is maybe if you're able to do seed A, B, maybe six of them would be Series A investments, maybe three would be seed, and then one would be B. And I think this is like a broader conversation that we can have later around like just the dynamics and like the mechanics around portfolio construction and why you do these things. But I think there's still a huge
Are
growth
we
gap.
going to do it in such a way that our audience will not get bored?
Yeah, I'm trying to make sure that we focus on like what we're trying to do, which is really just highlight what happened last year. But like in terms of how funds deploy, it's more technical than just saying, oh, they
Mm,
have this much money, so they should invest in this stage. Because like
fair
everyone has
point.
like
Yeah.
underlying thesis, and then for you to be able to invest in something, there's a good chance it's either a one-off exception or it's covered in the thesis you have agreed with your investors who have given you money. So it's part of your strategy to make some of those
Mm-hmm.
deals. But I think there's definitely a huge like growth gap. And then with the slowdown in global investments and investments from foreign investors, we've seen that affect like a bunch of our growth stage startups. I think like there have been a lot of
Yeah.
silent slowdowns with like some of the biggest startups across the continent. And
What
then
do you mean
I've heard
silent?
slowdown. So where startups have moved out of markets that they don't consider like the most profitable markets, though they aggressively
I
expanded
mean,
to
Yemi should
them
give us the
before.
tea.
Yeah, this tea doesn't exist to be given,
Actually,
but
you said you heard.
yeah, they're
So yeah, go on with
whispers.
that.
So
What did you hear? Tell us what you heard. We want to know. So we
there,
can have like enlightening conversations.
like I was
Yeah.
saying, there are whispers about like startups going away from like the extra markets they had and just doubling down on their core markets. And I think it's just aligned with just what people were trying to do last year, which has become more capital efficient. And then, so when you're in very high, like hyper growth stage, you test in a bunch of markets. Like if you look at, I'll say a Paystack or a Flutterwave, all their markets are definitely not equal, but there was
Mm-hmm.
value in saying we're in X amount of African countries.
Yeah.
But then suddenly, some of those countries, like as you've not been able to grow at scale there now, you don't have the capital required. You just have to slow down there or even shut down some of the markets. And I think when there's a lot more capital, we would see just growth back into those markets. So it's kind of like double down on your winners now. And that was a huge theme for most of last year. Then, sorry, back to I think the gap in investors also, it's been a very, very, very tough climb for emerging managers. And then, so typically, the definition of an emerging manager is a fund manager raising their first fund. That's like
Like
the
Yemi.
textbook definition of an emerging manager. And it's been a very
Yemi, how
tough,
much are you raising?
I'm not raising any funds yet,
Are you
but it's
sure?
been a
Don't
very
lie. Oh.
tough market for them globally. And for that reason also, so a bunch of them maybe played around with some of their money or they had first close, but then funds are just not coming the way they expected to, so they're
Mm-hmm.
struggling with closing the rest of their funds. And I think there definitely was a lot of pushback from emerging managers, and they just didn't do as much as they did uh, prior to last year. So I think those are, in
Yeah.
my opinion, some of the like things that caused that. And on the startup end, there was like friction from random things. Like I remember the SVB event that was like
Yeah,
DEFCON
that was
one.
chaos, man.
Yeah, it
I
felt
think the
like
Chaos.
FTX event also happened last year. I know we don't really people don't
yes,
really care
it
about
did.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah, it did.
FTX. I think they were months apart or two
Yeah,
Yeah, they
months.
were.
yeah.
It was like back to back stuff, and yeah, I thought we'd have more like deaths by now. Like when the whole thing happened at the time, just felt like startups are affected. We don't know the counts now, but they're up to 40, blah blah blah. Sources saying this and that. But I mean, we didn't really have shutdowns, and I mean, we
I,
did have a
I
few,
think there
but then
may
it's
have
like
been silent shutdowns, and a lot of these. announcements are probably lagged. I think I saw something, and I
Shutdowns
still
too.
need to,
I like
still need
hey
to
Konabek. Wait,
go
wait,
And
deep
now,
dive.
because you don't
for
want to
lack
loud it too early.
what? I mean,
Because of reporters
for
like you,
lack of a
yeah,
better
my
word,
guy, but like because of reporters
wow.
like you guys, you just be like hounding them for the news.
Nah, I think for lack of a better word, it's a cast because like you can hide a shutdown for I don't know 3 months. I mean, it's still lagged for maybe a month, and people start talking like, "Where is this startup? Where is that?" I guess I'm not sure. Okay, yeah, if it's forging was lagged, if you think about it, yeah. Anyways, but yeah, cool one. Yeah, I hear you guys. Yeah, you can lag shutdowns too. So
Yeah, so
we
I
might
think those will be
start to
lagged.
hear more now.
Yeah. And I think even when we're
Wow,
talking about like the
crazy.
slowdowns, a good example, and this was announced this year, was I think Bitcoin's closing down Bitcoin's Pro, which is one of the products
Yeah,
that they had. I don't know whether that's part of like a broader story, maybe it's just a strategic decision to shut down Bitcoin's Pro. But like that's just an idea or an example of like slowdowns in products and shutdowns in like sub products and markets. Then yes, SVB definitely felt like startup Armageddon. Like
Nah, this was like across all markets too, because like I remember wondering if my salary was gonna get paid last year, and like there's just like so much chaos, and finance officers just like CFOs just not getting any sleep, and it was just like crazy. But yeah,
yeah.
I sure it wasn't blown out of proportion. Just
I
saying.
don't think it was.
It wasn't blown out of
It
proportion.
wasn't.
It
I think
was
they were even trying
bad.
to contain the situation. It was really, 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 really bad.
Like I have found that friends are like in different countries. There were group chats where people are like, "Oh, this person, all his funds are stuck here. Like,
Yeah,
how do we do it?" One person is like, "Ah, yes, I was one of the lucky few that removed my money
yeah.
right
People
before."
were queuing up at the bank to get their money out, and like they told them, like, "Oh, sorry, you can't." Like, it was really, really bad. Like, it was bad.
There was no investor sleep and there was no founder sleep.
And
Like,
CFOs, I think CFOs are the ones that suffered the most, to be honest. But yeah,
yeah. Then just other lowlights. I think also like just in Africa, there was a lot of currency devaluation in major markets. Nigeria, Egypt
still
still
happening
recovering
as we
from
speak.
the devaluation
uh,
earlier. I think Kenya also. Yeah, so it was really that was hard on the founder end and also the
I
fund
think it
end.
was a little Durant, like among the top four markets that still stayed um, maybe the same as last year or 2 years ago. So yeah, like you said, the rand, Egyptian pound. Sorry, the
Egyptian pound, yeah,
yeah, the Egyptian pound, Kenyan shillings, and the naira, right? Yeah, all suffered
yeah.
about like 30 to 40%, and it's crazy because like when people, I mean, we've kind of flogged this topic, like startups reporting revenues in dollars and having to convert from the local currency to dollars, and it feels like they're not growing on dollar terms, but they're 2x whatever they're doing on like local currency terms. So it's hard for them and it's harsh, right? Because
I wouldn't
it's
say
no
it's
fault of
harsh.
theirs.
I wouldn't say it's
It
harsh.
is.
It's a
I think
market
it is though.
reality.
It
So
is, but like it's still very, very painful to have to deal with. Because even if a lot of people are saying, "Oh, then this is why like they should have focused on local investors," and
But yeah, we will give them money in
but
local
but then
uh,
it's like even
currency.
for local investors, say you give like a startup just hypothetically 1 million naira, the purchasing power of 1 million naira, like, and if even if they 5x the return with the way the exchange rate has gone down, like the purchasing power is not really like the change. It's almost like you
Four
just
million, not the last again.
you get so it's not even like a thing where it's like even if you focus on local
Yeah.
investors, it's just a thing about purchasing power and inflation just like taking up the chunk of the money, and so the returns that you would have made, quote unquote, just doesn't really even mean so much to the local investor too, right? So it's a very huge problem.
It's a
I
rat
don't know.
race.
Yeah.
I don't know how it's going to be solved, to be
personally,
honest.
I think if you raise in dollars, you value your company in dollars, you're going
Then
to
you should.
report in dollars.
Fair.
It's
Yes.
harsh.
Fair.
Like I
Yeah,
think
exactly.
it's one of the unique like things with emerging markets, and I think there are markets outside Africa that have had it harder, like on a currency level. And
I
It's
think
just one of
Brazil
those
did. If
things.
I'm or Argentina, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
One of them.
And like this brings the question of like the role of government and like how governments create like an enabling business environment, what happens
True.
next year. Uh but yeah, that would be fingers crossed, hope it gets better. If not, founders just have to work like twice, thrice, four times as hard. And I think they kind of used to doing that already, which may be unfair because like you increase in dollar terms from 1 million to 2 million, where in local terms you basically like 4x your
Bruh.
revenue. But I've seen like some
And
really fun founders that do like dual reporting now, where they're like, look, this is the cash on cash growth in local currency, but then this is what
word.
it had to look like. And also, like, I think it also helps with like a good way to think about how you expand. I know we had a conversation earlier when we were talking about like how it looks like there's a lot of interest in the francophone markets. I know this startup, name withheld, that they were doing business in Nigeria
Why
primarily.
is the
Then
name withheld?
they expanded 50% of their business to like francophone countries in 2022. So rolling into 2023, the naira took a hit, but it meant that rather than their revenues taking almost a 50% hit, it took about a 23 to 25% hit because
Mm,
50% of their revenues were in francophone
second.
countries, which are pegged to
You know,
the euro.
So let's
to
talk
the
about
euro.
that
Yeah.
actually. On topic of Francophone countries, in the reports we read, we saw that they experienced a growth in like their investments. So yeah, me as an investor, why do you think that was the case?
I think so. A big part of francophone, like Africa, and maybe primarily the Wemo region, like why there's a lot of interest there. It's 8 markets, the same currency, a lot of similar like factors, similar the same language. I won't say the same language entirely, but like French is like the primary language in addition to other languages across these markets. There's a license you can get that allows you to operate across these markets for a bunch of verticals, including fintech. I think Wave was the first startup to get an e-money license, which allows them to operate across all 8 markets. Individually, these markets look small. They're definitely not as big as Nigeria, but then they have the advantages that they bring to the table also. So I think that's a good thing. And a lot of the structures are similar in terms of like highly defragmented market. It's pretty much the same in all these regions. So it's a large untapped market. And when you bundle 8 countries as one market, and that's an oversimplification, by the way, because when
Right.
you look
Yeah.
deep into it, like it's
Yeah. I don't think Wave is more than two countries
yeah, Wave
at
is
the
in,
moment, for
Wave. I
instance.
think they're in two. They attempted to
Yeah.
expand to I
Senegal
think
and Ivory
three
Coast.
markets, and I don't know whether or not they
Yeah.
pulled back because there was an announcement about them expanding to some
Expanding, yeah.
additional countries. Let me try to remember what countries those were. I think Uganda, Burkina Faso, and Mali. But then I think they like went backwards and then basically decided to double down on Senegal and Ivory Coast. But then Senegal and
Mm-hmm.
Ivory Coast within themselves are, I think, the two biggest economic markets within that block, and it's dominate those two and then grow beyond. And I think everyone has thought about that, but it's now starting to think, okay, where do you overlay strategy and culture with these markets? What do you need to know that you don't? But I think it's a good region to expand for certain products. Excited about the region, like
So
it's
do you think that, and this is jumping a little bit into projections, but do you think that we're going to see a ton of expansions into those markets by companies that are already headquartered or focused on the big four African countries?
I think there's going to be a lot of doubling down on the big four rather than
Okay,
expansion now. I think people are weird because expansion takes money, like to
fair.
expand properly. So, like, in as much as like there's not as much capital available as there used to be, I think there'll be a lot more concentration, like in the
No,
markets where people.
but then like if they pose more benefit, right? So let's say you're doubling down. If you know that, to your point about the company, I forget the name, whose profit only took a small hit or
Oh, I didn't
revenue
say
only
the
took
name.
a small.
You didn't forget it. I just didn't
Okay,
say
you need to
the
need to know. Thank you for withholding their name. But anyway, the company that you mentioned, who shall not be named, whose revenue only took a small hit because they were diversified, like they had like a focus also on the francophone countries. Isn't that like a better strategy? Because again, you listed like the advantages of focusing on these countries, especially with regards to their currency and with the way that, at least I can speak for the naira, the way the naira currency is getting devalued, the rate is just really insane. And so if there's opportunity for me to spend a little more money to buy myself security, why shouldn't I do that? Why shouldn't I take that opportunity as opposed to spending more money with hopes that some magic happens and everything like becomes good again?
I think there is value here taken, but like there needs to be strategic alignment also. So I'm not just going to say, hey, founder ABC, say you're going to
Obviously,
Ivory
yeah.
Coast now because
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, what sector was that startup, for instance? Because it also depends on. No, no,
You will not say it.
it's a
no.
fintech
I'm just saying
startup. And I think because of the way their business model works,
it
like
was okay for them,
yeah,
like
they
kind of
find a
simple
way
for
to
them to
build
do.
like a trust system that works for them, which expands seamlessly across markets.
Oh, why do I feel like I know this startup? But anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know the startup and I'm out of the loop.
I don't think I know, but I think I know. But yeah, something like that will make sense. That maybe a traditional fintech where you have to get licenses, or a logistics startup or an e-commerce startup, right? Where language barriers can come into play, and just you understanding the market. So I feel like it also depends on the kind of play you have in the as a startup, right? Because you can't just see because of the currency devaluation, right? Even though it's a legit reason, like you've mentioned, right? You can't just jump into it without understanding the intricacies
Yeah.
involved
Yeah,
in
I'm not even
expanding.
saying, I'm not saying they should jump into. I'm just saying it's just like something to keep in mind, right? Like, is this a possibility? Is this something that
Plus, the market
you
isn't
look
that big
more
though
into?
when you think about it.
The market in the francophone countries,
Yeah, like it's just like it's Ivory Coast and Senegal,
is
like
the market in, okay, let me speak for Nigeria. Is the
So
market in Nigeria that big too?
well, kind of. I mean, you can find 5 million like digital bank, users here.
uh, actual like active users, or just like, oh, we paid you, we got a buff and a
Downloaded the
dab,
app, Sha.
and they say you should download the app and we'll give you 50
Yeah,
naira or something like that.
yeah. I mean, when you considered like the user base across Kuda, Fairmoney, Piggyvest, right? It's around that 5 million range, and it's like, please, you have 5 million people you can bank online. I don't think you can find that 5 million to even target in
Is
this
it a
smaller
thing of,
market.
should it be a thing of quantity of users? Or I feel like we're going in circles. Yami seems frustrated, but I'm going to die on this hill. Should it be a thing of like the number of users or the value, like the value that you could possibly get, and the security? Because if you have like, again, I'm just thinking of it from like a more economic point of view of
Hmm.
like maximizing revenue. Because for me, it's like, okay, you can boast of 4 million users, but how much money are you making?
I,
And
True.
I think like in all the markets there is money available.
yeah,
With these markets, it's probably just like you need to think very hard about what sector you're in, maybe.
which is
So
understandable.
a good part of that is I would say first on the finance side. So if you're building a soft product where you don't need to build like physical infra, it's probably easier to do that. It's a large market. I think Wemo region has over 135 million people. So it's and but then the thing now is they're kind of scattered around in the sense that they're a bunch of very big cities, which you probably should target if you're building like an infrastructure business. So there's Dakar, there's Cotonou, there are a bunch of cities
Abidjan.
that there's Abidjan. There are cities that have like huge number of people, and that's pretty much how it works. Like in most other markets, where most startups you see in Kenya who are doing like consumer products or in Nigeria or in Egypt, they are hyper focused on like the big cities first. So it's just understanding that the big cities here are probably smaller than the big cities in some of these other places. but then you can now potentially build like a network of a lot of big cities together. But yes, I think viable destination, viable location potentially, and
Yeah, we
it
just want
helps
us
to
to move
hedge
on.
against
Yeah, we just want
devaluation.
us to move on.
But yeah, 2023 was not just all doom and gloom. Like some good stuff happened, and I think it's nice for us to maybe highlight some of those. One I would say is though emerging managers like struggle to fundraise, we actually saw a lot more emerging managers still come up. So that's like probably a good sign. If these managers are able to raise substantial capital, there'll be more people with skin in the game and like skin in the markets also. We mentioned there were a lot of larger funds that successfully raised their new funds. So people like I think TLCom, Partech, Norskin, just to name a few. A
I want to
lot.
talk a little bit
Pardon?
about the Norskin one. Because I mean, earlier we're talking about how like we didn't there was a drop in like growth stage investments, and Norskin, at least I know that they announced that this fund that they had raised was going to be focused on growth stage startups, because like they said that there's been like an increase in accelerators and early stage investments, which is great, but they think that like there's a lot of opportunity in the growth stage space. And so my question now is, do we think that this will solve some of the problem that we had last year with like the drop in growth stage investments? Do we project to see more of those of growth stage investments this year with these kind of larger funds?
I think it potentially aids, like keyword aids, not stops, because we need a lot more capital allocators. You can't just have one primary growth stage investor because they would like if I was a primary growth stage investor, I don't have to do every deal.
Fair.
So you need like a large enough base of people that do understand the market and are able to do these. So I think it definitely helps to move the needle a bit, but I think there's still a very big gap for growth investors. And like in a market like when everything is good, you don't see it because like a bunch of like the biggest growth stage investors globally are invested in like different markets. There are startups that have gotten to a point where I think it's not as big a problem for them anymore. So like the Andelas, the Flutter Waves, like the
Yeah.
gap of this from a local perspective is not really a problem for them because they have a strong enough investor base with like global investors that it's not easy, but ideally it should be possible for them to raise additional capital if they need to.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Okay.
Yeah, so another key highlight from last year, we saw a lot of increase in acquisition activity from some of the growth stage players. So I think key companies include MoneyPoint with an acquisition, Fair Money, and I think there are a bunch of other players also that started to just do M&A activity.
Yeah, there are smaller players too, that the Champ and Hugo host, right? That was like
Yeah,
big news too.
Yeah, it's also I
And there are
think
smaller acquisitions that we didn't hear about too, right?
yeah I think Czech
but
also
the thing with
acquired.
acquisitions is that like they're not exciting to me if I don't hear the numbers. Sorry, I'm not sorry, but it is what it is because you're acquiring someone for I don't know without exchanging money or maybe just stock. We need to know, right? Yeah, it's it's exciting news, but I don't think we'll be celebrating Stripe Paystack like how we're doing if we didn't hear about the 200. I know I've said this a couple of times, but it is what it is. Money Points Kobo Kobo, for instance, you know, it's supposed to be a big acquisition because Kobo Kobo is a big player in East Africa, right? Money Points here in West Africa. But we don't know how much it was. And that's why sometimes it's hard, like it's easy to forget it even happened,
No, but I
Let
think
me
right?
just give side.
also as a lot of these are like private transactions, like no one
Why should it
Of
actually.
be
course, but
private though?
like
Like,
they're
but we
private,
did
but
like
when they are being announced in the US and everything, it's like, oh, we're happy, we're like, yeah, you
It's
know,
not all US
and
announcements that get like the numbers. Also, I think
too,
it's
I
important to know
understand too.
that.
most of them do though.
But like when you're raising money, it's not a private transaction. So why are we hearing about you raised $10 million? And don't tell us how much you exited for.
You know, make us start doing maths. Like, how much did they raise in total? How much could they possibly raise?
Exactly. Do you get it?
I'm a huge fan of like So every communication being strategic. So I'll give an example. Stripe Paystack acquisition, because of how Paystack was still going to operate, it was very strategic to know, look, Stripe views Paystack as their Africa arm. They've put in this much money to get it, and then this means we're going to support Paystack. Like, it has an effect on the market for Paystack from a strategic perspective. Or when you have fundraise announcements and you come and say, hey, I am one of four companies in this sector and I've raised three times as much as anyone else here. It's essentially saying I have investor confidence that is potentially positioning me as a market leader. So like those communications, like there's stuff that comes behind it. A lot of times these acquisitions that we're seeing are not entirely like cash acquisitions. And it's a way
Yeah,
for
exactly.
the announcements are a way for the acquirer to say, hey, we're getting bigger. But like we don't need to tell you by how much yet. But
I
I
hear
do
that.
like I would
I hear
love to
that.
know how much acquisitions are. It makes everyone's jobs easier because it gives like investors information on comps and then you know what like the going
Which is
transaction
very
rates.
important, exactly. And also, when you're building a startup as a founder, you know what's possible when you're in that space you're building. Because, yeah, everyone just looks at Paystack and think, I mean, look at the conversations that were happening at the time. Oh, 200 was too small, was too big, blah, blah, blah. And no one has exited for that amount since then. You
Insta
know,
deep, my
bar,
brother.
Insta Deep. No, no, I mean, in payments.
In payments, there was Waves partial acquisition for 500 million. My brother, yeah, the plug now. You can't be letting me remind you of this. Sendwave.
Waves was before.
No, but Send well, World Remit was after Paystack.
It was after Paystack.
It
But
was
then
after
again,
Paystack.
when you think about it, like, Sendwave isn't really, know what I'm saying.
It's not what? Use your words,
Use
please.
your words, please. Use your
Use your
translation.
words.
You understand what I'm saying?
I don't
I
But
don't
understand what you're
understand.
saying.
Sorry,
No,
you need to use
sorry. I have
English.
Sendwave
I,
on all the decks where I'm talking about African exits. Like you can't just say Sendwave. It's not words.
anyways, Insta Deep. When we're talking about Insta Deep acquisition,
See this guy.
which, yeah, I mean, to Yemi's point, like everything is strategic, right? So Medios, the guys that acquired Expensia. So Expensia is a Tunis-based startup. I think also based out of London to like InstaDeep. And it's funny how Tunisia had two major exits
Bigger exit. It
last
was,
year,
sorry, on an
and
unrelated note, I read somewhere that it was like people started building so much for like external markets to get acquired that it was becoming like a pandemic in Tunisia because of
because
those
of the exits, yeah.
exits. Yeah.
Are you serious?
Yeah,
Okay,
I
I
can't
should put
remember
it
where I
out.
read this.
That's cool. But yeah, I mean, we had two major exits there, and the whole of sub-Saharan Africa acted like nothing happened. But anyways,
It's not a
the media's
conversation, Tage.
It's no, I'm just saying, like, we should celebrate these things too, right? Because, like, I don't know, there's a deep one, for instance, AI, and with everything happening in that space, it should mean a lot for the continent. But yeah, going back to Yemi's point, so the media's acquisition of Expensia, I don't think the deal was announced for strategic reasons too. I think they're like PE, and they're trying to get into like the whole startup game. So for whatever reasons, they didn't announce it. So I get like, yeah, you know, it makes sense to companies like for whatever reason to announce or not announce figures of the deals that, of acquisition deals. But I just think it'd be more exciting to know just for the sake of the ecosystem.
Yeah,
Hopefully we get more this year. I mean, if we had Fair Money and Smile ID, around the $10-20 million range last year, when they acquired um, Payforce and Approve respectively. So yeah, I'll probably see more of that.
and then the final highlight from last year, I think, just from my perspective, is there was really good growth in investments in female-backed businesses. Also, so I think it was 24 to 38% of the deals, which is I think substantial. Though in terms of actual investment value, it didn't go up, but I think our assumption is it grows by volume first, and then the cascading effect, like over time as these startups grow, is in other years will get more representation as they are more growth stage female backed businesses. Yeah, so now we are gonna move to another segment where we talk about our predictions for 2024. And like no one has an idea how this is gonna go, but what we're gonna
Yeah, I
do
do.
is each
Chaos.
person is gonna have two predictions for the year. Just so no one steals my
Two.
predictions, I'm gonna go first. So I think my first prediction is think there's still gonna be a bit of a slowdown early in the year, but then there should be some pickup because I expect there will be some more growth stage activity towards the end of the year in terms of just investments. And then I feel like I say this every year, but I think this year we will get another major exit. And I think every year I've said we'll get a major exit. We kind of have. It looks like just in terms of like the global stock market, there's starting to be more activity towards startups going public. I think some African startups may attempt to, primarily maybe startups that earn their revenue in FX. There's a good chance I'm very wrong, but I think we would
We all
see.
know one startup that I think is trying to go public.
We all know
Who
like
is that, Danny?
who's that?
Ah ah.
It's Flutterwave. Yes, we all know Flutterwave
We
was
all know it's
public.
Flutterwave now.
Yes, so
Like,
that's damn it.
man,
So Yemi has dropped his predictions now, so you can cross his
that was
fingers.
only one prediction.
It was two:
What's the second
increase
one?
in growth stage investments and an exit.
Oh, that was my first one. I was gonna say, God, Yemi took my
Okay, maybe I'll
prediction.
just add a third one as Damn is complaining. I also think there is gonna be uh increase in investments in what I like to refer to as probably the secondary markets. So there's exciting stuff like a
Did you say
UNDP,
secondary markets?
yeah, the secondary market. So I think markets outside the core four. I'll even say maybe even tertiary markets. So like outside the core four, we have like secondaries like Ghana, Uganda, Morocco, Tunisia.
But would we
I
see
think
stuff from
we
like the
would
Gabon and the
see.
Botswana of the world
I'm saying
of the
more
continent?
Rwanda than Botswana, but
Now, Rwanda is going to be like, in my opinion, I don't know why we still refer to Rwanda as like a secondary market. I think they're actually more secondary, and I think they'll be moving more towards like primary because if Kenya has already made it to primary,
Dami,
yeah.
tell me a Rwandan startup.
I was expecting that.
Wait, wait, let me tell you why. I'm using logic.
No, no, no.
I,
Don't give
I
me
don't know a
logic.
Rwanda startup
Give me
right now.
numbers and names.
Wait, wait. I think there's a lot of okay, maybe okay. I think they're more secondary, and I'm saying this because a lot of the
Tertiary,
investments.
not
No, I
secondary.
think they will move into secondary.
You are slapping the secondary startups at the moment.
Okay, who are the secondary startups?
secondary markets, like there's Ghana. Ghana has large startups, even like cheaper cash, but it's a secondary. Sorry, like M Pharma, but it's a secondary market. There is Senegal, which has Wave, and it's still a secondary market. There's Uganda, which is a secondary market. There's Tunisia. There's Morocco. These are all secondary
Okay,
markets,
fair.
and they have
Okay, so
like
I think in my head, I think so. So this is the thing. I think because I track more traction with super early stage, there's just been like a ton of investment going into Rwanda, and like it seems like the Rwandan government is doing a lot of work and trying to bring startups there and trying to make it easy for people to run startups. So I think I'm using that as the basis of the thesis behind my prediction, which is maybe flawed, I guess, because I think in my head I'm like, okay, when I think of Kenya, I think of okay Rwanda behind it, and maybe that's also flawed thinking, right? But I think just because of a lot of the like the funds that were the innovation fund that was announced and that they've been deploying last year, like the Rwandan government has been doing a lot of work there. I'm thinking that they're trying to bring more companies into their country, and so I'm thinking, okay, there's gonna be more traction. There's gonna be more Rwandan startups coming up, but I just think that they're more early stage, so maybe that's why you define them as tertiary. But I think in my head, it's just like, okay, there's a lot of stuff going on there, and we definitely want to keep our eye on like that ecosystem. But I would definitely wouldn't pit it against like the Ghana and the Ugandas of the world, just because of like the amounts that they've raised and the kind like I don't want to say the age of the companies they have, but like they tend to they those markets have more growth stage startups for sure, than the Rwandan market. So I will agree with you ish that like they're a tertiary market.
And also, like, just in favor of your Rwanda, there's a good chance they may be having like substantial human capital inflow if Rishi Sunak's plans are able to come to fruition, where they're trying to basically, I think he's discussed with the Rwandan government, and they're trying to pass a bill through parliament that proposes that UK asylum seekers will be sent to Rwanda first to have their claims processed there. And then if their claims are successful, they would be moved, that basically they'll get like
So that's
asylum
why you
in
said
the
human
UK.
capital. Oh my
And
god.
if their
Wow,
asylum,
that's so rude.
it's human capital. Like asylum seekers are
Mm-hmm.
across like different asset classes. No, they're just called humans assets. Like they're across different skill classes. So it's increasing amount of potential consumers. Some asylum seekers come in with purchasing power. Some don't. Some come in with skills. So it's like essentially increasing like
True.
I
You have a
assume the
point.
quality across different segments of people just interested. But yeah, yay Rwanda.
Oh my god, you're mocking me at this point, but go off.
Tell me your predictions.
My prediction was just mostly like shift away from like the big four, not two away, but like we'll just be hearing more about like the smaller or the tertiary markets, the Rwandas, even like the ones that we've not even heard, the Botswanas, like the smaller ecosystem, the Tanzanias. Like I feel like there's some stuff that's happening in Tanzania too, just from an early stage lens. I think I'm more focused on like super early. I'm looking about like even pre-seed, like family and friends around stage startup. It seems like there's a lot of stuff happening in Tanzania too. And so I'm thinking that okay, there's gonna be you're gonna be hearing more from like those ecosystems this year. And my second prediction is around M&A. I think that there's definitely gonna be more acquisitions this year too. Um, and it seems like people are seeing that as like a viable exit strategy now. Like it's like one of yeah, I think people are seeing it as more like a viable exit strategy. I don't want to go too into that, and I think we'll definitely be hearing more around that this year. And also to Yemi's point, an increase in like growth stage investments. So maybe it'll be a little slower in the beginning of the year, but like mid towards the end of the year, we definitely will be hearing more. Hopefully, less extensions and bridges, and more next stage level raises. So I think that's it for me. Yemi smiling. Yemi, why are you smiling at
I
me?
have nothing to say. Tage, what are your predictions?
So first things first. Time bank will become a unicorn.
Bruh, you're basically cheating because like Time Bank already announced they're trying to raise 100 million at a unicorn
Well,
valuation.
it's still a
Mars
prediction.
just came
They're
like
not saying it's going to happen. Did they not say like no one is saying it's going to like for sure will happen? Since it's out there that it might happen, I might just predict that it will happen. So this is me saying it will happen. You understand? Actually, I don't know. Maybe it might happen or not. And money points too might be a unicorn. Then still talking about unicorns, we might see a unicorn like shut down, names unknown or withheld until further notice when it happens. Then talking about like late stage investing and all that. I think there's going to be what's it called? There's still going to be like the same reduction that we saw last year, this year in growth stage investing. And if it does, like if we see more startups raise growth stage rounds, they will have to like take serious valuation cuts because you know they're growing well, but like the currency devaluation doesn't help, right? And their numbers are most likely going to be on the like a decrease like in dollar in terms of dollar value from last year, and it probably lead to valuation cuts. So we might see more valuation cuts this year than last because everyone kind of raised at not everyone, but most startups raised at flat rounds last year. The bridge rounds, Series A extension, Series B extension, seed extension. Most of them were at flat rounds. Startups and founders trying to maintain devaluation that got during the 2021 and early 2022 VC boom. But it's going to be inevitable, like the down rounds this year. Which other prediction? We might probably see major acquisitions, like from the big fintechs. So Flutterwave, Money Point, on Afrik, Yoko, into Switch, right? They may acquire like very well known B2C players, like in the market, in different markets, as part of their casual play and just consolidation efforts to look attractive, for later rounds or in case of an IPO. So I mean, we know interest rates on Flutterwave are they've been on the IPO watch list for interest rates maybe 5+ years now. Flutterwave a year and two. So like those acquisitions will, just like how Stripe and Paystack happened, make them look more attractive to global investors. Should they? That's if they IPO this year. I think that's all.
So it looks like Tage is trying to kill African unicorns. Tage, which unicorn are you trying to kill? Yeah?
Man, we'll have to wait and find out and see by the end of the year. Just a prediction.
Okay, we'll see. Prophet stage. We'll see what happens by the end of the year.
That's me.
Um,
I'll open a church.
but but with that, I think we've come to the end of this tech roundup. I think it's been a very exciting January. It's been a very exciting 2023. A lot of things happened as we recapped, but we're super super excited for what's going to come this year. We know that there's going to be a lot of fun news that we'll be seeing, including possibly a unicorn dying. It's only Tej that knows which unicorn. But I guess maybe we'll all find out. We'll see.
It's a prediction now. I'm not saying to happen.
But that's a very specific prediction because you never say a company or you didn't say like a
Bruh, they're
said
like
a
10
Yeah,
year.
to make it
unicorns.
exciting.
Like
Bro
we
is
don't have
To
like,
that
make it
many
exciting.
unicorns.
Tage
So now
has a
everybody's not name as like which unicorn can probably
sniper
die.
waiting to kill somebody.
Bro.
Now, check
Um
what's talking about.
Ah.
oh my god. But yeah, with that, we've come to the end of this episode. Thank you so much for sticking with us. We'd love to also hear your predictions. So if you have any predictions about 2024, you can drop them in the comments or you can just put it on Twitter and tag us at visible.africa. But we hope that this has been an insightful episode for you. We hope you learned something. We hope we provoked some thoughts, at least some thought about which unicorn is going to die. And we hope to see you next month in our roundup. Yeah, thanks for listening, and we hope you have a great month ahead. Please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, share with your friends, add us when you're posting on Twitter or on LinkedIn, on social media, wherever. We would love to hear your thoughts. We would love to hear your comments. We would love to hear your feedback also. So, yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Bye.